Good morning, and welcome to Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. We're here for today's event to release the results of the Nation's Report Card 2013 Mathematics and Reading Grade 12. Thank you for coming, and thanks to those of you who have tuned in to the webcast. I'm Cornelia Orr, Executive Director of the National Assessment Governing Board and moderator for today's event. The National Assessment Governing Board is a nonpartisan organization created by Congress to set policy for the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, also known as the Nation's Report Card. The Governing Board is committed to making NAEP an accessible, useful resource for you. The report card results we'll reveal today show how 12th graders nationwide and in 13 pilot states performed on NAEP in reading and mathematics, subjects that are critical to students' success in their pursuits following high school. We will examine recent and long-term 12th grade achievement, how students in the 13 pilot states compare to the nation as a whole, and what the level of knowledge and skills 12th graders have. Before I begin, I would like to thank Dunbar High School, a school with a rich history in student academic achievement, for hosting us in this beautiful space. And now I'd like to invite Dunbar Principal Stephen Jackson and Jonathan Johnson, a senior here at Dunbar, to provide our official welcome and to share some brief remarks. Gentlemen?
Thank you. Welcome to the new state-of-the-art, historic Paul Laurence Dunbar High School, where leaders are cultivated and dreams are born. In our 140-year history, Dunbar has always emphasized the importance of education as our essential requirement in order to become a productive member of our society. Greatness is in our past and is part of our legacy at the historic Paul Laurence Dunbar High School. Giants such as Dr. Charles Drew, the Honorable Eleanor Norton Holmes, and Mayor Vincent Gray are all alumni of Dunbar's heritage. Since its inception, from 1870 on, Dunbar has had many great educators. Our first principal, Mary Jane Patterson, the first African-American female to receive a college degree, and she received it from Oberlin in 1863. The fourth woman to receive a PhD, Anna J. Cooper, was our principal from 1901 to 1905. The other three African-American women who received their PhD were also graduates of Dunbar. We also had the famous Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who is the father of Black history. He taught here for many years. In fact, he founded Black History Week at Dunbar. In addition, we had the great Charles Hamilton Houston, an attorney who became the Dean of Students and the Dean of the Law School at Howard University, and he's responsible for teaching the great Thurgood Marshall. In addition, we had the second principal of Dunbar, Richard T. Greener. Richard T. Greener was actually the first African-American to graduate from Harvard College, which became Harvard University in 1870. We also had the famous Edward Brooks, first Black senator since Reconstruction. He also graduated from Dunbar High School. Earlier this year, the U.S. Department of Education announced the launch of a new initiative, the Principal Ambassador Fellowship. In unveiling the program at the National Association of Secondary School Principals Conference, Secretary Arnie Duncan noted that the department staff, after the department staff spent the day of shadowing principals across the DC area, the participants highlighted the lack of principals' voices in dialogue surrounding education policy. To further expand Secretary Duncan's vision to include more principals, he, on behalf of the U.S. Department of Education, put together a panel for the Standing Committee of Principals for the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, also known as the nation's report card. I would like to thank Dr. Peggy Carr and her team for allowing me to be a part of this prestigious panel of principals that represent schools from around the country to provide expert counsel to inform the future of NAEP. And with that said, I want to welcome you again to the great historic Dunbar. And at this particular point, what I would like to do is I would like to introduce you to one of our seniors, Jonathan Johnson, who will say a few words of inspiration to you. Thank you.
Kind of tall. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the, welcome to the historic Paul Laurence Dunbar Senior High School. Think back to a time when you were forced to read Greek mythology by your excited English teacher. Each Greek god of excellence you skimmed through equated to an admiration that you remember forever. Picture Oedipus standing at the gates of Thebes, or Cupid flying too high. Or more appropriate for NAEP, let us use Odysseus. From the time of his childhood, young Odysseus had a dynamic mother and a fearless father and many wise teachers that prepared him for battle and equipped his very bloodline with the tools he needed to be a conqueror. My name is Jonathan Johnson. I'm a senior here at the historic Paul Laurence Dunbar Senior High School, and out of random sample of test takers for NAEP, I could easily be chosen, but would I be ready? Today, the students of America should not only have a vast vocabulary, the stamina to compete, and a well-knowledge of to draw rich water, the preparation for any test, not just our nation's scorecard, should start in primary school. There are three elements that will create a generation of scholars and that America is searching for. First, the motivation by which students should learn should be intrinsic. Secondly, the middle school years where much is lost to hormones and prepubescent discovery needs to be filled with disciplined learning and discovery of power and more malleable minds. And thirdly, our high schools need to become the institutions that the founders intended, hubs of learning and inspiration which are disciplined and cared for. Today, our panelists will ponder these questions. Are students making progress? How are students in pilot states performing? What level of knowledge and skills do students have? But I ask first, when was the last time you have spent a day in the life of a teenager? They say times have changed, people change, but students in the role and the definition of a student should never change. Thank you.
Wow. Isn't it an honor to be in a place with such a legacy? So, thank you so much, Principal Jackson and Jonathan Johnson, for those remarks. Well thought out and well delivered. Today, we also have a panel of experts who will give their thoughts and reactions to the report card. I'll briefly mention their names, and then each will bring their remarks, and I'll introduce them more formally at that time. The panel includes John Easton, Director of the Institute of Education Sciences and Acting Commissioner of the National Center for Education Statistics. Next, we'll hear from Dale Nowlin, a 12th grade mathematics teacher in Columbus, Indiana, in the Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation, and also a National Assessment Governing Board member. Following that, we will hear from Susan Pimentel, education consultant and curriculum specialist in English Language Arts and vice chair of the National Assessment Governing Board. Following Sue's remarks, we'll have a question and answer session during which you will be able to ask questions about the report card. You can see there are mics, there's a mic positioned right here. For our webcast attendees, you can submit a question for the panelists at any time during the webcast. Simply use the webcast screen to type your question in the chat area at the right of your screen, and then click Send to get the question to us. If you need technical assistance with the webcast, there's also a Help tab at the right of your screen that you can use. We encourage you to join in an ongoing conversation that will take place during and after this session using hashtag NAEP. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. John Q. Easton is Director of the Institute of Education Sciences and Acting Commissioner of the National Center for Education Statistics. He came to IES in 2009 from the Consortium on Chicago School Research at the University of Chicago, where he most recently served as its Executive Director. As IES Director, John leads 4 national research centers and a staff of 200 that oversees research and grant disbursement throughout the United States. John also served from 2003 to 2007 as a member of the National Assessment Governing Board, and now he is also an ex officio member of that governing board. He is the author of numerous reports and articles and 2 books about Chicago schools, Charting Chicago School Reform, Democratic Localism as a Lever for Change, and Organizing Schools for Improvement, Lessons from Chicago. John?
Thank you very much, Cornelia. It's a great pleasure to be here today to present the results of the 2013 12th grade mathematics and reading assessments from the National Assessment of Education Progress, the nation's report card. We released results for students in grades 4 and 8 last November. The 12th grade results I'm presenting today include both national results and the results for 13 states that volunteered to participate in the 2013 12th grade pilot. 11 of those states also participated in 2009, the first year of the pilot state assessment. The pilot is examining the feasibility of conducting NAEP 12th grade assessments at the state level for every state, as we do in grades 4 and 8. These assessments were administered about a year ago, early in 2013, to 92,000 12th graders. We have national results that we're going to present both for public and private school students, and these results are based on representative samples for the nation as a whole, not just the 13 pilot states. We present student performance on NAEP in 2 different ways: average scale scores and the percentage of students scoring in the different NAEP achievement levels. These achievement levels were developed by the National Assessment Governing Board, and the board sets standards for what students should know and be able to do. For each grade and each subject, the governing board establishes standards for basic, proficient, and advanced performance levels. Ultimately, our goal is to have all students performing at or above the proficient level. When I talk today about differences in scores and make comparisons, I'm only pointing out score differences that are statistically significant. For the most part, we will be comparing student performance in the 2013 administration with scores from the prior administration in 2009, the earliest assessment, and 2005 for mathematics and 1992 for reading. Our pilot 12th grade program began in 2009 with the 11 states you can see on the map shown in gray. In 2013, 2 additional states, Michigan and Tennessee, also participated. This next slide is very important to us. It shows the participation rates over time at the 12th grade. At the most recent administration, 90% of the schools in our initial sample agreed to participate in the NAEP assessment. This is the highest that we've ever had over this time period. We require a participation rate of at least 70% for us to report results. And we've easily achieved that rate since 1998. This next line shows the percentage of students within those schools who agreed to participate. You can see that we hit a low of 67% in 2005, but at the last administration in 2009, we were pleased to see an 84% student participation rate. So what we're really interested in is the overall participation rate, which is obtained by multiplying the school and student rates. So for example, for the most recent administration in 2013, we have an overall participation rate of 75%, and that's actually 84% of the 90%. So we're quite pleased to have reached that. I want to point out some important background or context level about the change in demographics of the 12th grade population over the years that we've administered 12th grade NAEP. This slide provides an overview of those changes. Since 1992, the percentages of students in some of the major groups have shifted. For example, the percentage of 12th grade students who are Hispanic has increased from 7% to 20%, while the percentage who are white has decreased from 74% to 58%. We don't show the percent for black students, but it has remained relatively constant at around 15%. The percentage of 12th graders identified as students with a disability has increased from 5 to 11%, while the percentage identified as English language learners increased from 2 to 3%. At the same time, we're really pleased to see an improvement in inclusion of students who are taking the assessments. The exclusion rate of English language learners and students with special needs decreased from 5 to 2%. Another change since 1992 is the size of the NAEP 12th grade sample, which has increased from 9,900 to 47,200. And this larger sample size increases greatly the precision of our results. The 12th grade population has also changed because more students are graduating from high school now. The averaged freshman graduation rate rose from 74% in 1992 to 81% in 2012. What this means is that some lower performing students who in the past might have left school before reaching the 12th grade are persisting with their high school education. We don't have 1992 graduation rates broken down by race ethnicity, but for 2012, the graduation rate ranged from 85% for white students to 68% for black students. When we make comparisons in 12th grade reading between 1992 and 2013, we must remember the extent to which the 12th grade population itself has shifted. Now we have an overview of the results of the reading and math assessments over time. As indicated by the up arrow, mathematics scores were higher than in 2005, the earliest assessment to which results from the current assessment can be compared. But the results were not significantly different from 2009, as indicated by the sideways arrow. Scores in 2013 for 12th grade reading were 4 points lower than in the first assessment year of 1992, but not significantly different from 2009. So to take a closer look at some of these results, we'll begin with mathematics. All of our NAEP assessments are based on content specifications and assessment frameworks developed by the National Assessment Governing Board. The most current mathematics framework was developed for use in 2009 incorporating changes made to the previous 2005 framework for mathematics. Scores for the NAEP 12th grade mathematics assessment are reported on a 0 to 200 scale. In 2005, the average score for the mathematics assessment was 150. In 2013, the average score was 153, higher than in 2005, but unchanged from 2009. The score for 2005 has an asterisk indicating that it is significantly different from 2013. In this case, the score for 2013 was 3 points higher. The triangle shown for 2009 indicates that the score for that year was significantly different from the score of the previous assessment. Again, in this case, a 3-point gain. This figure shows the changes that have occurred in the 12th grade average mathematics scores for the 6 racial ethnic groups identified by NAEP, as well as the changes in scores for male and female students. Scores are shown on the left in the green half of the chart, while score changes are shown in yellow on the right. Since 2009, scores for the 6 racial ethnic groups did not change significantly, as shown by the diamonds. Since 2005, scores have increased for all groups except for American Indian Alaska Native students, as indicated by the up arrows in the column on the far right. The numbers to the right of the arrow show the size of the increase, ranging from 4 points for white students to 13 points for students of 2 or more races. In 2013, the white-black score gap was 30 points, while the white-Hispanic gap was 21 points. The male-female gap was 3 points, with males outperforming females. None of these gaps changed significantly compared to either 2009 or 2005. In 2013, the percentage of 12th graders at or above proficient was 26%, an increase over the 23% for 2005. This bar chart shows the percentages of 12th graders below basic, at proficient, and at advanced in 2005, 2009, and 2013. Percentages that were different from 2013 are indicated by asterisks. For example, the percentage at proficient was higher in 2013 than 2009, while the percentage below basic was lower. Now, we're going to take a look at the relationship between student performance and students' course taking in mathematics, beginning with students who scored below the 25th percentile. So this is the lowest quarter of students by score. As the bar chart shows, 58% of students who scored below the 25th percentile on the assessment reported that Algebra 2 trigonometry was the highest level math course that they took. Few of these relatively low performing students reported taking math courses higher than Algebra 2 or trigonometry. Only 9% took pre-calculus and 3% took calculus. Now, in contrast, students in the top quartile, that is above the 75th percentile, only 15% of them took Algebra 2 trigonometry as their highest level mathematics course. 34% of the higher achieving students reported taking pre-calculus, and a full half, 50%, reported taking calculus as their highest level math course. These are demographic indicators for the 13 states that volunteered for state-level pilot assessment and help us understand some of the background, the differences in student populations in these states. The participating states vary greatly in population. On the one hand, we have Florida, one of our largest states in the nation, To the other hand, South Dakota is one of the smallest. They also vary in the makeup of their population. These figures show the range in 12th grade population percentages for the 13 states, along with the national percentage. The percentage of black students ranged from 1% in Idaho to 23% in Tennessee, compared to the national average of 15%. Hispanic students made up 1% of the student population in West Virginia and 27% in Florida, compared to the national average of 21%. There's also a wide range in the percentage of students who attend suburban schools, from a percentage that approaches 0 in South Dakota to as much as 77% in New Jersey, compared to a national average of 35%. The range of percentage of students who reported having a parent who graduated from college is narrower, from 41% in Arkansas to 58% in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Dakota, compared to a national average of 47%. So on this map, we're looking at the state performance of the volunteer states. In 2013, the percentage of 12th grade students at or above proficient in mathematics was higher than the national average in South Dakota, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. The percentages were comparable to the nation in Idaho, Iowa, Illinois, and Michigan, and lower than the national average in Arkansas, Tennessee, West Virginia, and Florida. So we're able to show changes in scores for the 11 states that participated in both 2009 and 2013. Scores increased in 2013 for the 4 states shown at the top of this figure: Arkansas, Connecticut, West Virginia, and Idaho. In New Jersey, Florida, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Illinois, Iowa, and Massachusetts, there was no significant change in scores. If we look at the state gains according to different subgroups within the overall student population, we see different patterns across these 4 states. In Arkansas, scores increased for male students but not for females. Average scores increased for white, black, and Hispanic students. In Connecticut, scores again increased for male students but not for female students. Mathematics scores did not change significantly for any of the 3 racial ethnic groups. For Idaho, scores did not change significantly for either male or female students. They did increase for white students, but not for Hispanic students. For black students, the sample size was not large enough for us to report results. In West Virginia, we again saw an increase for male but not female students, as well as increases for white and black students. Now we'll turn to reading. The NAEP scale is a little different for reading. It spans from 0 to 500 rather than 0 to 300 as we saw in math. In 2013, the average reading score was 288, unchanged from 2009, but lower than the score of 292 recorded in 1992, the first year of the assessment. Triangles for assessments in the intervening years indicate increases over the prior assessment when they point up, and they indicate decreases when they point down. This table shows the changes that have occurred in the 12th grade average reading scores for the 6 racial ethnic groups identified by NAEP, as well as the changes in scores for male and female students. The diamonds indicate that there were no changes in scores since 2009. Since 1992, scores declined for black students, male students, and female students. In 2013, the white-black score gap was 30 points, wider by 5 points compared to 1992. The white-Hispanic gap was 22 points in 2013 and did not show a change from 2009 or 1992. The gender gap in reading favored female students, the reverse of the gender gap for mathematics. Female students scored 10 points higher than males in 2013, with no change either from 1992 or 2009. This bar chart shows the percentage of 12th graders at the 3 achievement levels for the 12th grade assessment since 1992. In 2013, 32% of students were at proficient and 5% were at advanced. The percentage at proficient in 2013 was lower than 1992, while the percentage at advanced was higher. The combined percentage of students at or above proficient was lower than in 1992. The NAEP assessment asks a number of what we call background questions, and they ask students how often their class discussed interpretations of what they read. As this bar chart shows, the more frequently students discussed their reading in class, the higher their scores were likely to be. In 2013, the percentage of 12th graders at or above proficient in reading was higher than the nation in 7 states: Idaho, South Dakota, Iowa, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. The percentage was comparable to the national average in Illinois, Michigan, and Florida, and lower than the nation in 3 states: Arkansas, Tennessee, and West Virginia. 11 states participated in the first 12th grade pilot program in 2009. Scores increased in 2013 for the 2 states shown at the top of this figure, Connecticut and Arkansas. And the remaining states, these score changes are not significant. In 2013, 4 of the participating states recorded increases as compared to 2009 for at least one of the student groups shown here: male and female, and white, black, and Hispanic. Average scores for Arkansas and Connecticut improved between 2009 and 2013, while the average score for Idaho and West Virginia did not. In Arkansas, male students and white students had higher scores. In Connecticut, there were increases for male, white, and black students. In Idaho, scores increased for white and Hispanic students. In West Virginia, scores increased for male students only. This final map shows a summary of state results for both reading and math. As we've seen, 2 states, Arkansas and Connecticut, had score increases in both subjects. Idaho and West Virginia had increases for mathematics only. The 2 bar charts show the percentage at the bottom, show the percentage of 12th graders at or above proficient in 2013 for the 13 participating states in mathematics and reading. In mathematics, the percentages range from a high of 34% in Massachusetts to 14% in West Virginia. In reading, they range from 50% in Connecticut to 28% in West Virginia. There is much more information on student performance, both nationally and for the 13 states that participated in the state-level pilot, on our interactive website. In addition, you can access released questions through NAEP's Question Center and run your own analyses using the NAEP Data Explorer, our online data analysis tool. Now, I'd like to take a few more minutes and briefly demonstrate some of the new features we added to the online report card for the 12th grade release. Additional data from the 12th grade mathematics and reading assessments are available online. I'm going to walk through a brief demo of the interactive report, which allows the user to explore areas of interest in greater detail. Because the website for grades 4 and 8 have many of the same interactive features, today I'm going to focus on the enhancements made to the 12th grade report. As you can see, the home page provides a visual overview of the results. Each section of the page highlights a different aspect of findings. You scroll down and you'll find the nation's average score changes in reading and mathematics, the percentage of students at or above proficient in both subjects for the nation and select student groups, the score gains and percentages of students at or above proficient in the 13 volunteer pilot states, and information highlighting students' experiences in the classroom. You can dive directly into the report and learn more about the data presented by clicking on the blue links located at the bottom right hand of the screen. So now let's take a look at a few of the new features on the report by using the navigation bar on the left. On the Changes by Student Group page, the table at the top shows score changes by student group since the last assessment and the base year. The drop-down menus above the chart allow you to choose the subject and student group of your choice. Click on the labels in the left column to see the results by percentile. If we select mathematics and parental education level, for example, we see that there has been a 6-point score increase from 2005 to 2019 for students who reported that neither parent finished high school. When we click on that group label, we can see that the average score gains occurred in the 10th and 25th percentiles, with a 7 and 8-point gain respectively. Another new feature of the report is the ability to view results by race ethnicity in the context of other student characteristics. For example, we can now view race ethnicity results by parental education level, gender, and school location. We can isolate and compare any category across each racial ethnic group by clicking the appropriate bar. For instance, the chart pictured shows the scores for each racial ethnic group by parental education level. The key at the bottom tells us that the black bars denote the scores of students who reported that their parents did not finish high school. By clicking any of the black bars, you can see the scores across all racial ethnic categories. By re-clicking the bar, the graph resets and other factors can be explored. Scroll down the page to see how racial ethnic groups are making gains over time by the same characteristics. You can click on each of those trend lines for information on specific scores. The report also highlights a number of factors related to mathematics and reading education under focus learning contexts. Here, you can see scores by subject and learning context variables, including, among other, highest mathematics course and the question, mathematics is my favorite subject. For example, the top graph for mathematics shows the scores of students by highest level of mathematics course they reported taking. You can see that students who reported taking calculus scored higher than those in lower level courses. You can see the exact questions and answer options students encountered on the questionnaire by clicking the orange link to the right. Scroll down the page to see student responses to these survey questions by gender, race ethnicity, and parental education level. For example, by selecting highest level mathematics course, race ethnicity, we can see that the percentages of Asian Pacific Islander students who reported taking calculus, that's the dark green on the right, is higher than other groups and more than double that of students overall. Click on any bar to see exact percentages. As in the previous releases for the 2013 results, we offer several ways to explore state results. Users can view maps and charts showing state achievement level results, score gains, and achievement gaps by selected racial ethnic groups. For example, the map on the state achievement gaps page shows whether the gap between white and black students or white and Hispanic students has narrowed, widened, or stayed the same in the volunteer pilot states. Scroll down the page to see how the gaps and respective student group scores compare across participating states and to the nation's public schools. Here, you can see that the nation's score gap between white and black students in mathematics, that's that black bar at the top, is 29 points. If you look just below to the green bar representing West Virginia, you'll notice that the 12-point white-black gap is significantly narrower than the nation. In fact, West Virginia has the smallest white-black score gap of all the participating states. If you focus on average scores, you can see that black students in West Virginia scored on par with the nation's, while white students scored significantly lower than the nation. As always, we encourage you to further explore this site. This wraps up my part of the presentation today, and I would like to close by thanking the schools and students who participated in this assessment and who helped make NAEP possible. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was a lot of data. I'm sure you have a perspective on what you saw in the data that he presented, and he showed us an opportunity about how to dig a little deeper. And I hope that some questions are running around in your mind that you can ask at the end of our presentation today. We're first going to hear the perspectives of a mathematics educator and an English language arts educator about what these results mean to them. Our next speaker is Dale Nowlin, a 12th grade mathematics teacher and also a member of the National Assessment Governing Board. Dale is a 37-year teaching veteran who has taught in his home state of Indiana since 1979, long before some of you were born. He has taught at Columbus North High School since 1997, serves as the mathematics department chair for North High School and Northside Middle School of the Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation. Dale is also an adjunct faculty member at Indiana University in Bloomington, where he teaches calculus. Dale is past president of the Indiana Council of Teachers of Mathematics and has won numerous awards and grants, including the Presidential Award for Excellence in Mathematics and Science Teaching, and also the Lilly Endowment Teacher Creativity Grant. We are pleased you could be with us here today, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here in this fabulous building. As a high school teacher, I always enjoy seeing different school buildings, and this makes me a little envious. I have 5 minutes or so to share my thoughts and reactions, really looking at the data through the lens of a classroom teacher. This is a rare treat for me because as a high school teacher, I rarely get to speak for 5 or 6 uninterrupted minutes. So, you saw the big picture in mathematics, and basically the big picture is compared to 2005, there were some gains made, but since 2009, it's been kind of flat. And you also saw the breakdown by ethnicity. The first thing that I would like to mention is if you look at, and the first thing doesn't relate to the slide you're looking at, the first thing is if you look at the breakdown by achievement levels, most of the ethnic groups made numerical gains in the achievement levels, but they weren't significant, looking from 2009 to 2013. There was one group that was significant, and it was the Hispanics. The percent of Hispanics who scored at or above basic had a significant gain from 2009. That was the only one of those that was significant. John showed you data on achievement gaps, and this is another way to look at that data. If you look at the graph, all of the groups, we're looking at whites, blacks, and Hispanics. No, that's just white-black. But they've made gains, but the size of the gap between the two groups has remained the same. And if you look at the gap between whites and Hispanics, maybe we don't have that one, but you'll see a similar thing. Oh, there's all three. All three groups have made some gains since 2005, but the size of the gaps has really remained unchanged. And that's really important because what you saw in Dr. Easton's slides also was the changing demographics. Just to relate that to my local level, when I came to North High School in 1997, we had a handful of Hispanic students. A few enough you could count them on your fingers. And today we are pushing close to 200 Hispanic students. So if these gaps persist and our scores keep going up, our overall average could still go down because our demographics are changing. So it's really, really important that we look at ways to close these gaps. And if you think about the changes, I mean, I'm in a small city in southern Indiana, and if the demographics are changing that much there, that really says they're changing all across the country. The next gap I want to look at is the male-female gap. The interesting thing about this, it's not very large, but it's been really consistent at about a 3-point gap. And the other gaps you might attribute to things like they live in inner city versus suburban, or difference in parent educational background, or socioeconomic differences. But if you're looking at male-female, they're coming from the same places and they have basically the same parent background. So we don't have other things we can attribute those differences to. When I see those, I wonder if it goes back to the myth that boys are better at doing math, and we need to do all we can to debunk that myth. I saw that actually recently. At my school, we had 4 students who were in the national finals for Moody's Mega Math Challenge in New York City. And I'm telling you that for 2 reasons. One is I get to brag about my students because they went to New York City for the national finals. We were the only one of the 6 final schools that was not a magnet school for math or science. But the other is our team was all 4 guys. We didn't send any girls to the finals, which had me a little upset. And when I actually watched the finals on a webcast, there were, of the 6 schools, there were 23 teams, and 5 of them were girls. So at all levels, we see that we really need to do all we can to encourage girls to get into more higher level math classes, more higher level science classes, as much as we can. When the students take the NAEP assessment, obviously when they do the math assessment, they are asked a whole lot of questions about math, but they're also asked other questions, and you saw some of those on the slides that Dr. Easton was showing us. They're called contextual questions, and on the National Assessment Governing Board, we've actually spent quite a bit of time in the past couple years rethinking those and looking at those and how much information comes from those kinds of questions. And you saw on the Data Explorer that you can dig in yourself and look at all kinds of things relating to those contextual questions. For me, they provide some interesting insight. One of the contextual questions is about parental level of education. It really looks at the student's background, where they come from. It also is a way of looking at socioeconomic level. And what I notice, there's obviously a big difference. It makes a big difference to a student. And here's where I see that in my school. We have a lot of students who come from homes where they get lots of support from their parents. Their parents either help them with the homework, or by the time you're in high school, maybe they can't help, but at least they make sure that the homework gets done. They take them on trips every chance they get, and they have educational parts to those trips. They support them in lots and lots of ways. But we also have students whose parents can't afford to take them on trips, or the parents are working a couple jobs, a couple minimum wage jobs just to survive. In fact, we have many students where the students are working 20 to 40 hours a week. We have parents who might have had not such a good experience themselves with schools, so they don't necessarily value the education, or they're intimidated by the schools, so they really can't support their son or daughter in that way. So the challenge for us as educators is we need to set up systems that support those students who don't get the support at home. Often we set up systems that work really, really well if the parents are involved in working with their son or daughter. And the challenge is, how do you make it work when they don't have all that support at home? The next contextual question I want to look at is highest math course taken, and we saw that in a couple slides that Dr. Easton showed us. And there's definite difference between, this one is looking at the lowest 25%, those that scored at or below the 25th percentile, versus those that scored at or above the 75th percentile. And obviously, if you take calculus, you tended to end up with a higher score. One conclusion from that could be that we put all students into calculus, but that would definitely be a bad idea, because we don't want to put students into courses that they're not ready for. This actually reminds me of several years ago, we had, as professional development, we had a futurist come and speak to our faculty. And one of his comments to us was that we should have 30% of our students taking calculus. And of course, afterwards, all the math teachers came to me and said, that was certainly ridiculous, wasn't it? And at the time, we had about 5% of our students taking calculus. We had 1 or 2 calculus classes a year. And I said, well, that seems like a stretch, but I think we could probably get more students than we have. And we worked at putting things into place to get more students. We opened up 8th grade algebra to more students. We started a 7th grade algebra program. We rethought how we teach algebra to students. We offered students the opportunity to do a block Algebra 2 geometry class, so they could do 2 math courses in a year. And next year we have, I don't know the exact number, but we have 31% of our students enrolled in, 31% of our students will have had calculus before they graduate by next year. And so what seemed like unrealistic when we first heard it, now it seems like normalcy to us. So I think the challenge there is students really are capable of a lot more than we think they are if we set things in place to help them achieve that. I should add, I'm a calculus teacher, so I'm a little biased, but aside from the 31% taking calculus, we also have 3 sections of students taking AP statistics and 3 sections of students taking college credit finite math, and 1 section of students taking multivariable calculus. So we've come a long way from where we were not too many years ago when we heard the futurists come and speak to us. Another contextual variable is student engagement. And I suppose it shouldn't surprise us that 36% of the students in the lower quartile found that their math class was never or hardly ever engaging. And at the same time, that's the challenge, because if we want those students to do better, then we have to do something to make sure that they're engaged in math class. At our school, the way we approach that, our theme is who's doing the math. And if the students are spending their class time watching the teacher do the math at the board, then they're not engaged and they're not learning math. They're just watching someone else do math. They come away thinking, gee, that teacher is really good at math. So we've continued to make efforts to make sure that during class time it's the students doing the math and that they're engaged in doing that. Finally, in kind of a related question, when it comes to the question of do students find their math class to be challenging? And I thought this was interesting. There's not much difference between the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile here. And from a practical standpoint, you would think if students are performing poorly on the test, they should find everything they do in their math class to be challenging. So I don't know if this is what this data is showing us, but it reminds me of recently there was a NAEP curriculum study that came out, and the results were that often math classes, the title of the course didn't necessarily follow what was being taught. And one of the pitfalls we always have to watch out, be careful of, I guess, is if we have students who are struggling, which would be the students in the lower quartile, we can't water down the curriculum for those students, that we have to find ways, work really, really hard at finding ways that they're doing challenging math and that they stay engaged in it. And that's not an easy task. Finally, to put a little local perspective on it, I live in a community in the Midwest that's really heavily into manufacturing. In fact, we make diesel engines where I live. And I've had the chance to tour several different factories in town, and one thing that really amazes me is that, actually when I was in college, I worked in a steel mill. And the difference between my experience working in a factory and when I see factories now, the mathematics that typical line workers need in the factories I've been in is comparable to the mathematics that several years ago was required to go to college. So we really can't separate. When we're looking at math achievement, well, these kids aren't going to college and these kids are. If we're going to prepare kids for the workforce, we really need to look at preparing all students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. I think he makes me want to be in his math class. Our next speaker today is Susan Pimentel, an education consultant and curriculum specialist and also vice chair of the National Assessment Governing Board. Sue is a founding partner of the nonprofit Student Achievement Partners and a standards and curriculum specialist. For close to 3 days, her work has focused on helping communities, districts, and states work together to advance enduring education reform and champion proven methods for increasing academic rigor. Her local and state-level curriculum work has included advising such school systems as that of a local one, Prince George's County, Maryland. On the national level, Susan was a lead writer of the Common Core State Standards for English, Language Arts, and Literacy, as well as a chief architect of the American Diploma Project benchmarks, which were designed to close the gap between high school demands and post-secondary expectations. We look forward to your insights, Sue.
Thank you, and good morning. I just want to start my remarks by saying that I think the 12th grade NAEP is so critical because it gives us a glimpse into how well prepared, academically prepared our students are to go on to college and careers. So I just want to start with just a little recap of the results that, John, you gave us that really show that since 2009, not much has changed, which isn't maybe bad news, but it's not really good news. But more troubling are the next results, which show that from 1992, the trend is down. And that's really concerning because here we are trying to prepare our students for college and careers, and things are dropping. It's more important than when we look at some results for unsettling trends, I would call them, for certain students. So if we could have the next slide. Go to the next slide. Okay. So African American performance, we can see here, right? The average reading score was 5 points lower in 2013 than 1992. The gap has gotten wider when we get so much attention to closing the gap. And then look at this one, only 4% of students are scoring at the 75th percentile, and yet African Americans students make about 14% of the population. So this is troubling. The next slide will show us something about ELL students, and here I think what I want you to know is that it was 10 points lower since 2005, and look at the whopping gap there is between ELL students and non-ELL students, 53 points. So, what do all these results mean? Because we want to make sense of them. So I want to read to you, and you can see it here, and just read along with me, an English language learner expert, Lily Wong Fillmore, who maybe several of you know. And she says language minority students, and I just want to pause here. Language minority students are students who speak English, so they're not, they haven't come from other countries with other languages, but they're scoring at about where English language learners score. So that's why the researchers call them language minority students. Find themselves increasingly segregated, whether by schools or by classes, where the materials are pitched at a much lower level than materials meant for mainstream students. English learners, Lily says, especially are provided adapted texts, materials that are so greatly simplified that they provide virtually no exposure to the forms and structures of the language they should be learning. There's a lot of attention and energy focused on turning L's into English speakers, and not nearly enough on educating them. What L's and language minorities need are authentic and age-appropriate texts, which they work on with appropriate instructional support from teachers who know how to support language development. Now, this is about English language learners, but these practices also trap a lot of our students, and I believe they trap a lot of our African American students into a vicious cycle. And when we look at the contextual variables, you can begin, I want to talk about these because they corroborate what the researchers are telling us may be going on. So the first one you see is that reading is enjoyable. So students who strongly disagreed with this score 45 points lower. 45 points. Now, you can say, do students who read well enjoy it, which is sort of chicken and egg, or do they enjoy it and so therefore they read better? We don't know. But then look at the next, 45 points too. When I read books, I learn a lot. So students who strongly disagreed with this statement scored 45 points below. So now go back to what Lily Wong Fillmore said, right? She told us that a lot of students are reading mush. They're reading simplified texts that aren't going to get students where they are. So if you're getting mush to read, how are you going to learn much? You're not going to learn much from it, right? And you're not going to see text as something that you can learn from. So I think there's a correlation there. And the contextual variables go on, again, from the students' own mouths and thoughts. The next slide. So we got into, and John, you mentioned this one too, about students being able to discuss reading interpretations in class. So again, you see students who do it rarely or never scored lower. And then the next one, which is students who are able to explain what they read in class, so students who do it a lot score about 28 points higher than students who do not. So practice matters here, and practice of the right stuff matters here. So I sort of come down to the place here where when we think about students being ready for college and careers, we think about them being able to read challenging texts and to be able to cite evidence from it. It's what they're going to be called on to do in the workplace. It's going to be what they're called on to do in their college and classes. So I do think that while the results are troubling, and they're stagnant at best, they're going down, the gaps are getting wider. I think we have something of a way forward here when we put all the data together, which is asking 12th grade students, and I might say asking 12th grade students, but I also might say asking students from, and I think we heard this from our Dunbar students, from the earliest ages on up, that they're asked to talk and write about the challenging text that they read. And that practice here matters. And I know this is all correlational data, but if you think back into your own life, there are a couple of us who I suppose, if you've never skied before, you can go down the slope and you do it like an Olympic champion. But for most of us, we need to start and then we need to have lots of practice with it. So I think there is a way forward here as we think about preparing all of our students for college and careers, thinking about what students are telling us they're getting practice with and they're not, and that they need the challenging texts so that they can learn from them. And with that, I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Now it's time for questions and answers, and I know there have been some issues that you may have formulating in your mind. If you would like to ask a question, I want you to come over to this microphone on my right, and we're going to begin with a question from our web audience first while you get your thoughts together so we can pace ourselves. But if you'll come over here, I'll come to you second. Valerie, do we have a question from our web audience?
We do, Cornelia. This first question is for John. How much do earlier scores predict a student's score in grade 12? And what about graduation rates? Does that provide any indication?
Let me first address the question about correlation. We don't have longitudinal NAEP data. That is, we don't follow the same students, so we can't do NAEP studies to look at the correlations over time. But typically, research has shown for decades that test scores are highly correlated from year to year. One year after another, they tend to be very highly correlated. They get less correlated over time. Now, I'm not sure what exactly you meant about the graduation rate, but I'm going to go off NAEP a little bit and talk about research that I did in Chicago and my colleagues continue to do. And we find that the highest predictor of high school graduation is how well kids do in their freshman year in high school. And that high attendance and good grades are the most important predictor of high school graduation. And I'd be happy to provide a citation for that.
Thank you, John. All right, from our audience now, step to the mic and introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Thank you. I'm Lisa Hansel with the Core Knowledge Foundation, and thank you very much for a very interesting morning here. Just a quick question actually for Susan. My favorite part of the Common Core standards is actually the call for content-rich curriculum, and I really appreciate everything that you said about talking about, writing about challenging texts. But I think there's another part of that I'd just love for you to talk about a little bit in terms of that building the vocabulary and knowledge across disciplines.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So the Common Core does really talk about a content-rich curriculum, and in fact, in some cases even names the founding documents and Shakespeare and early American Lit as content that students should have. The fact is, and this notion, the 45 points below, lower when it was the whole notion about I don't learn from text. The whole point of being able to learn from text in a coherent sequence of topics and that you read about a coherent sequence of text around a topic is so critical. We know from the research that if students don't have a knowledge base, they're less likely to be able to understand a text. You can imagine yourself, or imagine myself. Physics, for example, hard for me to get. If I have the more knowledge I have about physics, the better able I then am able to understand challenging text about physics. And vocabulary is critical. We've known for, I want to say, the research dates back about 100 years about the critical nature of vocabulary. And the way you build vocabulary is by reading a lot, talking a lot about topics, about the world, about the knowledge of the world, so that's how you then build a vocabulary. So just taking me back to physics, the more I read in the area of physics and I get the understanding of the context of physics, the kind of vocabulary that's being used, the way information is getting presented, the more I understand about physics, the more I'm able to read about physics. So you're absolutely right. And so that's why that 45 points and I don't learn from text is especially troubling. So it is about challenging text, about things we want students to learn and about things students want to learn. I'm glad you raised that. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. We'll take another question from the audience. Please introduce yourself and ask your question.
Good morning. Erica Taylor from the National Education Association, and my question is for John Easton. To what do you attribute the huge change in sample size from 2009 to 2013 in participants?
Oh, that's an easy one. It's the participation of the volunteer states.
Okay, thank you.
All right, another from the audience. Go ahead and step to the mic.
I'm not sure that I got the
Please
question.
Introduce yourself. I'm sorry, please introduce yourself.
I'm Carrie Thornhill, and I'm a member of the Dunbar Alumni Federation, and we're delighted to have you here. The last question may have related to my concern about understanding better the methodology, because you are the nation's report card, but yet you had volunteer states, and so I want to understand how are you using the data from the pilot states to generalize for the nation, or how are you determining what the nation's rate is?
That's a very good question, and a number of people have asked a similar question because it's a little confusing. We first of all take a nationally representative sample separately, independently.
Okay.
And then in the 13 volunteer states, we take extra sampling. And we use the entirely nationally representative numbers to present the national findings.
Okay. I have a second part to my question, and that is, during the course of the study, did you learn from any of the communities what's helping the most in terms of gains in both reading and math that we can use to help us advance those areas in our jurisdictions?
I can't give you specific findings, but I can tell you some of our process. Dr. Peggy Carr, who's sitting right close to you, meets with the state coordinators and reviews the results from the states with them before the public release, and asks the states what kinds of things might be going on.
Right.
And so we saw, for example, in Connecticut, very nice improvement for black males in reading. We saw in West Virginia a great improvement for black males in mathematics. So we can't actually give you an answer, but we really strongly recommend that some folks out there do some investigation in this that can be shared more broadly.
Okay.
Yeah, that exceeds the limits of what NAEP is able to do to figure
I
out.
suspected so, but I'm sure they learned something that we can use.
Thank you very much.
From you.
All right, we'll take another question from the audience now.
Hello, my name is Devin Daniels, and I'm a junior at Dunbar High School. I wanted to ask more along the lines of when you showed that 2009, 2013, there was not much of a reasonable change within reading and math. Can you tell us, like, is there a certain reason for this, or was it something you noticed that may have caused why there's not much of a change during this sort of time period, like for the grade 12?
I'm afraid that's another question that we really don't know the answer to. We're asking basically the same, not exactly the same questions, but the same types of questions, the same format, so nothing is changing in the test. As I pointed out, there has been a slight change in the demographics of the kids who are taking the test, but we're not really able to answer the questions about why did this happen. That goes back to the question we just heard, that this assessment doesn't really provide much about the causes of changes. It's just totally descriptive about what's going on.
So Sue Pimentel does work nationally and may have some theories about your question.
Yeah, so I do think, and I think Dale can probably respond a little bit to this too, while we can't say cause and effect, I think when we look at what students self-report in terms of the kinds of practice they're given, the kinds of things they're asked to do in class, the kinds of math classes they're allowed to take, opportunities to take, and you look at the differences in their scores, which are substantial. I think there are places here, if I were still in a school, and a principal of a school or a teacher in a school, I would be looking at this data, and I would look at not just what's happening, but I would then go back and see, we know from the data, but what's happening in my own class, what's happening in my own school, and I would have a conversation about, are we asking students to read challenging text? Are we asking them to read a coherent selection of text so they learn from the text? Remember, we had that 45%. Are students being asked to explain and talk about the text that they're reading in class? Because if the students are saying that they're not and they're scoring a lot lower, I would want to make sure in my own school that something would be changing here. So I think the contextual variables give us some hints about what we need to pay attention to as educators. And I don't know if Dale, you have any more to add to that.
I don't know that I have anything different to add, but I think the contextual variables are the key there. They don't tell us what causes things, but if we see certain things are in place, those students are getting better scores, then it would make sense to try to put those things in place. Do what we can do to put those in place well so they work.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. All right, one more from the audience, and then we'll go back to the web questions.
My name is Tajay Williams. I'm a junior at Dunbar High School. Okay. I have a question about the graph that you did about students not liking reading. So I was asking, how will you be able to make sure students actually start to like it, and how do you know it's not based on their motivation?
Yeah, well, it can be based on motivation, but I think as educators, our job is to help students see the wonders in reading, and for teachers to bring forth texts that they're passionate about, either because they're content rich, or they're just beautiful words and well written. So yes, I think that there are lots of distractions now in life for all of us with technology and the like. But I think that as educators, and you may all have some ideas about how to make sure that students are reading a lot and enjoying it. I do think that there's a mix between really good texts in class where a teacher is bringing those forward, assisting students in sort of grappling with them, and then also making sure that students are given a volume of reading where maybe you have some choices about what you want to read deeply on, or choices about what you'd like to research on. But I do think that there is when I've seen students, and we've seen this from maybe some of the data, that students like to be challenged. They don't want just some simple thing. They want their brains to be respected, and if it's challenging and it feels important, we're finding around the country that as teachers bring more challenging texts and content-rich texts, as we heard one of our questioners ask about, that students are really getting into it. So you may have some ideas too.
Thank you. All right, Valerie from the website, and then we'll come back to an audience question.
Sure, Cornelia. I have a question. We talked a lot about what teachers and students could do, and we talked a lot about contextual background variables. But let's talk about what parent leaders can do. We've got a great question from Sheila Holmes. She's a NAACP parent leader, as well as a PTSA leader in her school. And so she wants to know, with this knowledge from learning today's data, what are next steps that parent leaders can do? Sue and Dale, would you like to take a stab at this one?
Yes, actually, that also reminds me of not just this recent NAEP release, but the math curriculum study release. I think there's many of the same things keep coming out. One thing parents can do is really get an idea of what's going on in their schools, what's going on in the classes. Do all students have access to high-level classes? And then not just do they have access to high-level classes, but go deeper than just the title of the course and find out, are they actually teaching the curriculum as it's meant to be taught? And then, I guess as a personal bias, I would say to find out what's going on in the classroom in terms of student engagement. Are the students spending most of their time watching things be done, or are the students jumping in and actually, whether it's reading or math, are the students doing it and getting engaged in the discussion and the conversation?
So yay for everything that Dale just said, and I think that getting underneath, like if I went into a parent meeting now, I might have some of those contextual variables in my mind, whether it's higher level courses or whether it's, being able, how often are students asked to explain what they're reading. I might even go in and observe. The other thing though is that I do think that parents can really help. We just talked about motivation for reading, that parents can really help challenge their kids to read through the summer. We know from the research that volume of reading is important. And it could be about a topic that they're learning in school, where the parent helps them find some other text that may be interesting for them around those topics, or it could be just of a topic of interest to the child, teenager himself or herself. So I think parents have a role to play here in volume of reading.
All right, now a question from our audience again.
Good morning. My name is Mary Ann Wilmer. And first of all, I want to congratulate NAEP and NCES in what has happened since the onset of NAEP and how far it has been developed, from the beginning to the present time. And I think we're at a state of the game where in we can collect a lot of the information that people here in the audience have asked for regarding, what has made a difference. And one way of doing that perhaps is to offer to graduate students who are looking for topics for thesis and dissertations to collect that research data. And perhaps the NAEP or NAEP or the Department of Education can do that, offer some research grants to teachers or people who are in graduate programs.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you. All right, Valerie?
Cornelia, this will be our last question. And I think a lot of people might be wondering this. We have a question from our webcast audience, and this one's for you, John. If our state was not included in 2013, is there an equation or is there some way that we can find an equivalent measure on math and reading levels?
I want to repeat the question because I'm not sure I got it. So if a state did not participate in 2013 12th grade, is there a way that they can estimate their performance?
Absolutely.
At this point, there actually is not. We have done specialized studies in the past that relate state results to NAEP scores in elementary grades. I'm not aware of such a study with the 12th grade.
Okay. Thank you, John. And I want to thank this audience. You've been an absolutely wonderful audience, very engaged in listening to the presentation today. And thank you to all of the participants on the webcast. I hope that today's events marks for you a beginning of your engagement with this report card and the additional data that are available on the website. We know that there are many more questions and ideas to be considered after hearing the results of this report. We hope that after today's events, you'll continue the conversation on Twitter, #NAEP. Please visit the NAEP report card website, which features the report card data from today, and also on the event page, you can actually find links to the comments from the panelists and other materials that were presented today. Next Wednesday, actually, on May 14th, the Governing Board will release findings about today's results about 12th graders on NAEP and their academic preparedness for college. This might actually answer the last questioner's question about how can a state know how well they're doing, because there are some links in that research that will be presented to national assessments. The difficulty is that NAEP is the only assessment that tests all 12th graders. So other assessments test samples of students even in 11th or 12th grade. You can find out about upcoming events by following the governing boards and NAEP on Facebook and Twitter. Journalists with additional questions on the report card may call the governing board special affairs specialist, Stefan Harris. In closing, I want to thank each of you, John, Dale, and Sue, for your presentation today. And of course, I would like to thank all of you for participating in the events. Thank you very much.